Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that's half fog, half fairy tale, where the stars hover above your head like cold candles and the grass crunches softly beneath your boots. You find yourself in medieval Iceland, and it's not exactly the fiery volcanic postcard you've seen on Instagram. It's darker, colder, and surprisingly full of cows with names so peculiar you'd think the farmers were halfway comedians. You probably won't survive this. Between the endless winter nights, the confusing laws, and the fact that you can't even call your cow Moo without legal oversight. Well, good luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you trudge through the meadow at midnight is how the stars refuse to sleep. They hang above the lava-scarred land, sharp and white, guiding you through the rolling pastures where farmers still tend their herds. Each cow isn't just a cow. Each one has a name, and that name is more than affection. It's a matter of law. You can almost hear the way the syllables being whispered into the night air. Sinjabjorn Snow Bear, Ronif Red Nose, and a dozen more that sound half poem, half nickname. Mainstream fact first. Medieval Iceland really did run on a system of naming animals, especially when ownership disputes loomed. With herds roaming free in open pasture, everyone needed a way to say, "That's my cow, not yours." You can't exactly slap a QR code on a heifer in the 12th century, so names did the trick. And here's the fringe tidbit. Some farmers claim they picked names by watching the constellations. If a calf was born under the glittering belt of Orion, it might be called Stjörnuskin, Starhide. If the northern lights flickered at calving time, you might meet an Aurora's daughter chewing cud by the turf wall. Historians still argue whether that star naming was genuine practice or just sagas being dramatic, but the idea lingers like a lullaby in the dark. You pause by a stone wall, lichen glowing faintly in moonlight. The farmer beside you pats a cow's broad back and tells you, in a voice soft from years of wind, that names were chosen not just for fun but for survival. If a dispute went to the Ilingi, the great Icelandic parliament, having a proper, distinctive name could mean the difference between keeping your livelihood or losing it. Imagine the tension. No, my lord, that's not just any brindle cow. That is Buttercup, daughter of Redhorn, named on the eve of St. Olaf's feast. The court scribes would nod gravely and write it down. There's a soft joke humming in this system, too. If you think your online passwords are complicated, try juggling the genealogy of cattle. At least your Wi-Fi router doesn't wander into your neighbor's meadow. Well, hopefully, as you shuffle further, your boots sinking into peat, you begin to hear the subtle layering of sound. The lowing of cows, the distant crash of the sea, the crackle of turf fires in nearby longhouses. It's like the island itself is dozing, and you're walking through its dream. The farmers are proud, of course. Names are their way of boasting, of weaving family honor into the hide of each beast. To call your cow Red Nose isn't childish. It's a marker, a claim, an anchor in a world where land and livestock mean life. And yet, some names veer toward the ridiculous. One saga mentions a cow called Little Snorer. You picture it now. A placid creature lying in the hay, wheezing faintly and the whole family laughing while still knowing the sleepy cow had to be logged at the assembly. Another record hint at names so long and elaborate they'd take up half the parchment line. Imagine a medieval clerk sighing heavily as he inks milk white born at first snow with one horn bent. Somewhere, the modern bureaucrat in you groans in sympathy. The stars above shift slowly, and the Milky Way looks like spilled milk across the blackness. A perfect cosmic backdrop for this naming ritual. You notice how farmers tilt their heads skyward, as if waiting for the constellations to wink approval. Maybe you do it too, feeling half superstitious. After all, if you had to keep track of which shaggy beast belonged to whom, wouldn't you look for guidance in the heavens? By now, the chill has crept into your bones, but you almost don't mind. The rhythm of naming is like a chant, a lullaby that softens the edges of time. Somewhere in your drifting thoughts, you wonder whether any of these cows knew their names. Did Buttercup flicker ears when called? Did Starhide glance upward at the auroras? Historians still argue whether names were functional tools alone or carried deeper spiritual meaning, perhaps linking her to Iceland's precarious natural balance. The debates swirl like the northern lights overhead, impossible to pin down, but beautiful to drift beneath. So you walk on, guided by the faint glow of stars and the murmur of names in the midnight pasture. The air smells of damp moss, cowhide, and distant salt spray. Your eyelids feel heavier, but you keep moving, step by step, deeper into this quiet, peculiar world where a cow's name might just be the most important word spoken all season. You wander toward the heart of the island, where a flat plain opens beneath a wide sky. The ground crunches with frost, though it's summer by the calendar, and the wind carries a bite that makes you pull your cloak closer. Ahead, you see a ring of stones rising out of the earth like the ribs of some sleeping giant. This is the Ilingi, the great parliament of Iceland, where men and women once gathered to settle matters of law, trade, and, oddly enough, cow names. The stones themselves are silent, but you imagine voices bouncing between them, measured tones of chieftains, crackling laughter of farmers, and the slow, precise chanting of legal formulas. Each stone feels like a witness, and you crouch near one, tracing the rough surface as if you might still hear echoes in its pores. Mainstream fact. The Ilingi was established around 930 CE and is often cited as the world's oldest parliament still in existence. That makes this field not just another meadow, but the cradle of a remarkable experiment in governance. And yes, part of that governance was deciding whether your cow's name was unique enough to prove ownership. Quirky tidbit? Some sources hint that the laws were recited out loud in full every summer by the law speaker, a role so daunting that the poor man had to memorize an entire legal code. Historians still argue whether he remembered it word for word, or if he allowed himself a little poetic license when listing the more ridiculous cow disputes. Picture it. The law speaker standing tall, his cloak whipping the wind, his voice rising to announce, and let it be known that no cow shall share the same name as another within the district, lest fines be imposed. You, try not to chuckle. Imagine him pausing mid-speech to clear his throat and rattle off names like Buttercup, Snow Ear, Honey Nose. It's like medieval roll call for a barnyard choir. You sit cross-legged near the ring of stones, feeling the weight of formalities settle around you. To the farmers, these weren't silly details. They were survival tactics. A cow wasn't just an animal. It was milk, cheese, meat, hide, and a kind of walking bank account. Ownership mattered, and so did the proof of that ownership. A name carved into memory, or sometimes into wood or bone, was like a medieval receipt. You can almost hear a farmer muttering, "No, truly, Judge, that cow is Sinjabjorn. I swear by the turf roof over my head." There's a light-hearted side, too. Imagine the exasperated clerk, who had to keep records straight. He dips his quill in ink, scratches a note onto vellum, and realizes two different farmers both want to name their calf Milkwhite. His sigh could probably be heard across the valley. It's not unlike trying to find a new email address today when all the simple names are taken. Sorry, sir. Buttercup 123 is already in use. As you lean back against the cold stone, the parliament field quiets around you. You picture tents pitched in the grass, fires flickering, merchants shouting over wares of wool and dried fish. People drift in from all corners of Iceland, and among them, disputes simmer. Who owns the brown calf with a white ear? Was it named properly last spring? Did someone steal the name? Or worse, the cow itself? It might sound tedious, but here's the funny thing. These rules kept peace. In a world without fences, clear naming conventions prevented fights that could escalate into blood feuds. And yet, historians still argue whether the whole naming law was rigidly enforced or more of a cultural guideline. Perhaps some communities cared deeply, while others shrugged and settled over ale. Your mind drifts with that thought. The stones around you don't press for answers. They simply stand, witnesses to centuries of whispered arguments and grudging agreements. You imagine the farmers trudging home afterward, relieved or resentful, their cows lowing patiently in the background. 1,000 years later, the echoes of the negotiation still hover here, mingling with the sigh of the wind. Somewhere nearby, a raven croaks, the kind of sound that threads straight into your bones. You pull your cloak tighter and smile faintly. You realize this whole gathering, this circle of lost stones, this open-air parliament, feels both monumental and absurdly human. People argued here about life and death matters, yes, but also about whether your neighbor had the right to call his cow Starhide when yours already had the name. And you, still half awake, half asleep, let the voices blur in your imagination. You hear lore recited like a lullaby, punctuated by the occasional chuckle, and you know that even here, under laws carved from stone and memory, human quirks seeped in. The wind rises, then settles again. You close your eyes and picture the assembly dispersing. Farmers leading their cows back to meadows, names secure for another season. The stones remain, silent keepers of rule that once made perfect sense in a land of endless fields and endless stars. You leave the stone circle of Ilingi behind, but its echoes follow you down the slope. The air smells faintly of smoke from distant turf houses, and somewhere a stream gurgles under a crust of moss. Ahead, the meadow opens again, dotted with shaggy cattle that seem almost too calm for the chilly wind. You wander closer, and soon you begin to notice something oddly intimate about them. Each beast bears not just a look or a brand, but a name whispered by the farmer as if it were part of the animal's hide. Here's the mainstream fact to ground you. Medieval Icelandic farmers used names for their cows in daily life and in legal contexts. While most European peasants might simply distinguish cows by color or age, Icelanders leaned heavily on formalized naming as a way to keep the chaos in check. And those names, they weren't generic brown cow placeholders. They carried personality, quirks, and sometimes a bit of dry humor. Take Ranulf, Red Nose. Imagine trudging out into the Frostcaller Inn, and everyone knows exactly which cow that is. Or Buttercup, a name you'd think came straight from an English meadow, but in Icelandic it rolls off the tongue like a soft charm. Some sagas mention others. Skjoltmi, Shield Maiden, for a feisty cow, or Sinjabjorn, Snow Bear, for one born during a blizzard. And here's the quirky tidbit. One preserved law text implies that if you called two cows by the same name, you might owe compensation, as though you'd accidentally stolen part of someone's identity. Historians still argue whether this rule was enforced strictly or whether it served more as a cultural joke, a warning to be created with your naming. You settle on a low stone wall and listen to the farmers calling out. The names ripple across the field like a chorus, each syllable marking ownership. It's soothing in its own strange way, like a medieval roll call. You chuckle softly, thinking of modern problems, how parents argue over baby names, or how you struggle to find a unique username online. Icelanders, it turns out, were doing the same balancing act with their livestock. Imagine trying to log into your cow registry, only to find Red Nose already taken. The cows themselves blink at you, wide-eyed, jaws working slowly. You wonder if they recognize their own names. Did Buttercup feel special when called? Did Red Nose know she was the subject of legal arguments? Or were the names more for humans, a linguistic tether to keep peace in the pasture? You pick up on the humor of it all. A grizzled farmer mutters, "That's Longtail," and you glance over to see a cow with the stubbiest tail in the herd. It's a joke, a small rebellion in a world otherwise bound by cold, hunger, and law. Somewhere, you imagine a farmer naming his cow Priest Hat just to see the bishop twitch. At the same time, you sense pride in these syllables. To name a cow wasn't just bookkeeping. It was a chance to place part of your identity on the land. A well-named cow could carry status. Families became known for their herds, and herds were remembered for their names. In an island society where honor and memory mattered as much as wealth, that meant something. The evening deepens, though the northern sky never fully darkens. You lie back on the mossy ground and watch as the cows shift lazily, their bells clinking in uneven rhythm. The names drift around you, Buttercup, Red Nose, Snow Bear, like fragment of lullaby. You smile faintly at the absurdity and tenderness of it. Historians still argue whether this focus on cow names reflected a deeper cultural need. Was it simply pragmatic, or was it an echo of pagan animism, a belief that names held power over the creatures they described? The debate feels endless, much like the Icelandic night, and you're happy to let it roll on without needing resolution. As you close your eyes for a moment, You imagine waking in another life, a farmer with hands rough from rope and a voice hoarse from calling names across the frost. Maybe your cow is Buttercup. Maybe she's Shield Maiden. Maybe she's something only you and the stars would understand. The names linger, as gentle and peculiar as the land itself. The meadow narrows into a path lined with low birch shrubs, their branches rattling in the wind like dry bones. You follow it to a clearing where two neighbors face each other, arms folded, voices raised just enough to cut the night air. At first, you think they're arguing over land or sheep straying across boundaries, but no, it's about a cow's name. You stop a few paces away, leaning against a boulder, pretending to study the moss while your ears catch every word. Mainstream fact. Disputes over livestock were central to medieval Icelandic law. With no fences to separate property, animals wandered freely. And when a cow was valuable for milk, hides, and offspring, ownership had to be crystal clear. Names served as verbal brands, but names, as you can hear now, are tricky things. The two men argue over who has a right to call their cow Topper, Snowcap. One insists his family has used the name for generations. The other swears he named his calf during the last winter storm. Quirky tidbit? Some sagas tell of entire assemblies bogged down by the debate over duplicated names, with neighbors presenting witnesses. I heard him call the calf Snowcap at dawn on St. Olaf's Day, as though a cow's nickname were sacred scripture. Historians still argue whether these records reflect literal cases or exaggerated anecdotes to amuse readers. Either way, the spectacle you're witnessing feels half comic, half tragic. The men's wives stand nearby, shawls pulled tight, rolling their eyes. One mutters something about men having too much time on their hands. You almost laugh out loud, but stifle it, realizing this is deadly serious in their world. The fine for misnaming or for stealing a name might be paid in cheese wheels or a portion of butter. Resources that could mean survival in lean months. To lose such a case is more than embarrassment. It's hardship. You notice how the cows themselves graze peacefully a few yards away, utterly indifferent. One lifts her head, blinking at the quarrel, then lowers it again to chew. It's almost like she's saying, "Call me what you like, I'm still chewing this grass." You can't help but smile. That's your second light joke of the night, and you imagine repeating it to a friend later. Medieval Icelanders fought over names while the cows just kept on eating. The argument grows louder, and you watch as a bystander steps in, a local lawman, his cloak tugged tight by the wind. He raises a hand, calls for silence, and proposes the obvious. "Take it to the Ilingi." The men grumble but nod, knowing that the open-air parliament is the ultimate referee. Their quarrel will become another stone in the endless wall of Icelandic legal tradition. You picture the process. The neighbors traveling days to the assembly. Tents pitched among the crowd. Witnesses brought forth to testify about who first used Snowcap. And in the end, a ruling carved into the communal memory of the island. Ownership is confirmed, fines are paid, and life trudges on. Historians still argue whether these disputes were frequent or whether sagas simply exaggerated them for humor. Was it truly common to see two grown men risk honor over a cow's name? Or were these tales meant as cautionary comedy, reminding future generations not to let pride inflate the small stuff? You lean into the uncertainty, enjoying the thought that even in history's dustiest corners, people bicker over things that, from a distance, feel almost absurd. The wind drops suddenly, leaving a quiet so deep you hear your own breath. The neighbors have fallen silent too, staring at each other across the dark grass. Finally, one shrugs, mutters, "We'll see at the thing," and stalks away. The other stands firm, pride stiffening his back, but you can tell he's relieved it didn't come to blows. You exhale, realizing that in the society, names aren't small at all. They're law, identity, economy, and honor wrapped into one syllable. And you, a sleepy wanderer in the Icelandic dark, have just witnessed how a simple word can weigh heavier than the stars above. The path takes you farther north, toward a cluster of turf-roofed buildings crouching against the wind like tired animals. Smoke curls from low chimneys, and you duck inside one, blinking as your eyes adjust from moonlight to lamplight. The room smells of parchment, candle wax, and a faint tang of sheep wool. At a long table sit a pair of monks, their tonsured heads bent low, quills scratching steadily across sheets of vellum. You realize you've stumbled into the silent world of scribes, where even cow names can end up preserved in ink for centuries. Mainstream fact: Iceland, despite its rugged remoteness, became one of the great centers of medieval manuscript culture. Monks and lay scribes alike wrote down laws, sagas, genealogies, and even farm records. Without them, we'd know far less about the peculiar naming practices you've been following tonight. Some of these laws survive in Gragas, the medieval Icelandic law code, compiled in part by such scribes. The quirky tidbit comes into focus as you lean over their shoulders. One monk is carefully writing a list of livestock for a local chieftain, and among the names you catch are things like honey ear and crooked horn. But the ink blotches halfway through, leaving a permanent black smear across Crooked Horn's name. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine arguing at the Alingi about ownership when the clerk's blot has literally swallowed your cow's legal identity. Some scholars even speculate that these little accidents in manuscripts cause disputes, when two families claim the same beast because the written record was unreadable. Historians still argue whether blotted names were ignored, contested, or creatively reinterpreted by officials eager to move things along. The monks themselves seem weary, shoulders stooped, lips moving as they mutter syllables to keep the words straight. One pauses, rubs his temples, and dips the quill again. You imagine the monotony, hour after hour, recording not just noble deeds, but also the ownership of a cow named Little Snorer. It's like being tasked with transcribing the world's dullest soap opera. And yet these men keep going, their careful work outlasting the centuries. You notice how the lamplight makes the ink glisten as though it were still wet, the letters curling with a beauty far beyond their mundane content. The monk sighs, scratches out a correction, and you realize that even here, in a room built for prayer and learning, cow names matter enough to demand space on scarce vellum. It's oddly comforting. Proof that history isn't all kings and battles, but also the quiet scratch of quills writing down who owns Buttercup. And there's humor tucked in, too. You hear one monk mutter under his breath, something like, "If I write one more cow named after a body part, I'll throw this quill into the fire." His companion doesn't reply, just smirks faintly. You get the sense that behind their pious demeanor, they understood the ridiculousness of it all. The atmosphere lulls you. The scratching of quills becomes rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Candlelight flickers against the walls, shadows bending into rooms. You lean back, half dozing, imagining centuries later, when a modern scholar pores over the very same page, marveling at the blend of precision and absurdity. Did the farmer truly call his cow Milkfoot, or was it a scribe's misheard mumble? The debate goes on. Historians still argue whether odd names in manuscripts reflect genuine farm practice or scribal errors. Either way, the cows and their names shuffle along the corridors of history, thanks to these tired hands. You rest your head against the rough timber wall, breathing in the mingled scent of vellum and smoke. Outside, the wind moans across the turf, but in here the world is small, contained in ink and whispered syllables. You can feel yourself drifting, lulled by the steady rhythm of quills, and the absurd thought that somewhere 1,000 years from now, someone will still be chuckling about Little Snorer. You leave the cloistered air of the scriptorium and step back into the night. The wind tugs at your cloak, carrying with it the muffled sounds of chatter from a nearby longhouse. Drawn by the glow leaking through the turf-framed door, you duck inside. The smoky warmth hits you immediately, and your eyes adjust to see families gathered around a central hearth. Men are trading news, but your attention is caught by the women, wives, daughters, and widows, whose voices ripple through the smoky haze. They aren't talking about church or cooking. They're lobbying, gently but firmly, about what to name the family's newest calf. Mainstream fact: in medieval Iceland, women wielded more influence than many of their European contemporaries. They could divorce, inherit property, and even bring cases to the Alingi. Their voices mattered, and when it came to cattle, symbols of wealth and survival, they had a say. Quirky tidbit? Some sagas mention women insisting on names that honored family lineage, weaving maternal pride into livestock just as much as paternal. One tale hints of the wife demanding that her calf be named after her mother's line, to ensure the memory lived on through the herd. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or more of a literary flourish to highlight strong female characters. You lean closer, watching one woman fold her arms and fix her husband with a look sharp enough to cut butter. "It will be called Bright Ear," she insists. The man sighs, mutters about tradition, and counters with Stout Horn. A daughter pipes up, giggling. "Why not both?" The room bursts with laughter, though you suspect the debate will continue until someone relents. You notice how these naming conversations are not just playful. They are negotiations of status, honor, and memory. A well-chosen name could reflect a family's values, piety, strength, humor, or even quiet defiance. You catch a woman whispering to her sister that she'd rather name the calf after an old pagan goddess, though the priest would frown. It's a subtle rebellion, a way to smuggle heritage into daily life. And there's humor, always humor. An old grandmother cackles from her corner, claiming she once named a cow after a neighbor she disliked, just so she could yell insults across the pasture without breaking any laws. Everyone laughs, and you can't help joining in quietly. It's the kind of joke that transcends centuries, a reminder that people always find creative loopholes. The firelight flickers against the low ceiling, painting the room in gold and shadow. You notice how the women dominate the rhythm of the conversation, their words steering the family consensus. Men nod, children listen, and somewhere in the corner, a boy carves the chosen name onto a wooden tally stick. You realize that in this dim longhouse, law and culture intertwine with everyday negotiation. Historians still argue whether women's influence extended officially into the law courts regarding cattle, or whether their voices were confined to the hearth. But sitting here, you feel the truth in the laughter and the firm tones. Women mattered, and their words shaped not only family life but the names echoing across the meadows. You lean back, letting the warmth seep into your bones. The smoke stings your eyes, but the rhythm of voices is lulling, like waves against a dark shore. You imagine Buttercup, Bright Ear, and Stout Horn all grazing tomorrow under the same sky, their names carrying the imprint of tonight's debate. In this moment, you feel the weight of women's voices, not shouted from lost stones, but whispered and argued into the fabric of Icelandic tradition. You step back into the open night, carrying the warmth of the longhouse voices with you. The land stretches wide, and a cold wind brushes your face. Ahead, low roofs crouch against the horizon, and from within them, smoke curls upward like lazy ribbons. You follow the sound of lowing to a barn, its doorway hung with frozen straw. Pushing inside, you find cows huddled close together, steam rising from their bodies in the dim glow of a tallow lamp. Mainstream fact: winters in medieval Iceland were long, dark, and brutally cold. Farmers brought their animals indoors, not only to protect them, but also to share body heat with the family. In many turf houses, cows and humans lived under the same roof, separated by a low partition. The steady warmth of livestock was as vital as fire. Quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest farmers whispered the cows' names at night, partly to calm them, partly to ensure the names stayed alive in memory. Historians still argue whether these whispers had legal weight, serving as an oral reminder of ownership, or whether it was simply a farmer's lullaby, soothing both cow and family through endless darkness. You settle against the wooden partition, listening. The cows breathe heavily, their breath turning into pale clouds. Children snuggle under wool blankets, half asleep, but you can hear them murmuring names like a bedtime chant. Buttercup, Red Nose, Bright Ear. The syllables float into the rafters, mingling with the smoke. You smile at the thought. This is less a legal system and more a lullaby woven into survival. The barn is dim, and your eyes wander across the shapes. A cow stirs, shifting on the straw, her horns glinting faintly. She flicks an ear when her name is called, and you wonder, did she recognize it? Did she know she was Buttercup, as much a member of the family as the sleepy child across the room? Or was it all for the human's sake, a fragile tether in the dark? You catch a father's voice in the half-light. He tells a story of how their cow Sinjabjorn once calved during a snowstorm so fierce that even the sheep vanished in drifts. The name, Snow Bear, carried that memory forever, locking a winter's terror into a single word. The children giggle, then yawn, their eyelids drooping. The father's voice slows. softens, until it blends with the rhythm of the cow's breathing. There's humor here, too. A grandmother pipes up in the far corner, recalling how one cow snored so loudly that they had to shout her name just to drown it out. "Little snorer," she cackles, and the children giggle again. The joke lingers like smoke, lightening the heavy air. You can almost imagine a medieval sitcom. Family huddle with cows, complaining about who snores louder. The lamp sputters, casting long shadows against the turf walls. You notice the carved tally sticks propped in the corner, each marked with symbols for named animals. A boy picks one up, tracing the lines with his finger. It's a record, a memory device, a way to anchor law into daily life. You realize that naming isn't just for ownership. It's a ritual, a way of surviving the endless dark by weaving meaning into the creatures beside you. Historians still argue whether this closeness to animals shaped Icelandic culture more deeply than we admit. Did living shoulder to shoulder with cattle create a different sense of family, of language, of law? Or are we romanticizing the night, hearing more intimacy in those murmured names than was truly felt? The debate drifts through your mind as your eyelids grow heavy. You lean back against the timber, listening to the layered lullaby, the crackle of straw, the sigh of cows, the whisper of names. Outside, the blizzard moans across the plain. But in here, the warmth holds steady. Buttercup breathes deeply. Red Nose flicks her ear and you, caught in their rhythm. Feel yourself sinking into the gentle, peculiar comfort of a world where a cow's name keeps the darkness at bay. Morning drags its pale light across the land, though in Iceland it feels less like sunrise and more like the sky reluctantly turning from black to gray. You step out of the barn, breath puffing in the cold, and notice a small gathering near a low turf bench. Farmers have assembled with solemn faces, not to debate borders or blood feuds, but to discuss penalties. Specifically, what happens when someone steals a cow's name. Mainstream fact: Icelandic law was notorious for its fines, or boetir, often paid not in coin but in goods. Cheese wheels, butter, or dried fish served as currency when silver was scarce. And yes, misusing or duplicating a cow's name could result in such fines. The quirky tidbit? One saga alludes to a farmer forced to surrender an entire stack of cheese because he brazenly tried to rename his neighbor's cow as his own. It's the medieval equivalent of copyright infringement, except instead of paying damages in cash, you hand over dairy. Historians still argue whether these cheese fines were common legal practice or satirical exaggeration, poking fun at how seriously Icelanders treated their cows. You watch the scene unfold. A broad-shouldered farmer stands accused. His neighbor jabs a finger, voice rising. "He called my bright ear by that name before witnesses." The accused shrugs, insisting it was his calf all along. The lawman, weary-eyed, raises both hands for calm and declares the penalty: 3 wheels of cheese to be handed over before the next full moon. You bite back a laugh. Imagine losing a month of milk for a naming slip. The crowd murmurs approval, though a few smirk. One boy whispers to another that his father once tried to argue a cow was named Red Ear rather than Bright Ear, hoping the slight difference would fool the court. He still lost a barrel of butter. The children giggle, and you can't help joining in silently. It's bureaucracy at its most human, splitting hairs or horns over syllables. As you drift among the onlookers, you notice how penalties double as entertainment. Farmers exchange gossip. Wives compare whose cheese is tastier, and elders shake their heads at youthful arrogance. You realize that in a society where survival hinged on community, fines weren't just punishment. They were rituals that reminded everyone how fragile harmony could be. You picture the stack of cheese sitting in the plaintiff's storeroom later, each will smelling faintly of smoke and grass. Does he gloat every time he cuts a slice, muttering, "This came from Brytier's thief"? Or does he sigh, realizing it's just one more piece of evidence that even in a harsh land, people never stop quarreling over small things? Historians still argue whether such punishments carried symbolic weight, reinforcing the sacredness of names, or whether they were simply practical ways to redistribute resources. Either way, you're struck by the absurd beauty of it. Names carry such power that misusing one costs you dinner. The assembly breaks up slowly. The guilty farmer trudges away, muttering about cows and unfair laws, while the victor beams with quiet pride, already planning how to enjoy his winnings. You trail behind, boots crunching on frost, amused by how justice in this world tastes of butter and cheese. As you glance back at the bench where judgment was passed, you catch yourself smiling. Somewhere deep down, you realize that humans have always needed systems, however odd, however dairy-flavored, to keep peace. And here in medieval Iceland, that system could turn a cow's name into a currency all its own. The day lengthens, though length is a generous word when the sun only crawls a few finger breadths above the horizon. You follow the sound of voices across a frozen field and find yourself among herders driving cattle toward open pasture. The cows move slowly, their breaths steaming, bells jangling with uneven rhythm. What captures your attention, though, is the chanting, low, steady, almost melodic. Each herder calls names into the cold air, not as conversation but as song. Mainstream fact. Herding chants were common in medieval Iceland. Farmers used rhythmic calling to guide animals, the sound carrying across the wide, treeless landscapes. The names of cows, when repeated in sing-song patterns, became more than identifiers. They acted as auditory beacons. Quirky tidbit? Some preserved folk rhymes contain animal names woven into verses that helped herders keep track of the group. Imagine reciting bright ear, red nose, honeyhorn in rhythm while trudging through fog. Historians still argue whether these chants were purely functional or whether they evolved into a kind of pastoral art, blending necessity with entertainment. You stand on a ridge listening. A herder's voice rises. Snjabjorn, Buttercup, Crooked Horn. Each name lingers on the wind before it fades into the lowing chorus of the herd. Another herder answers with his own list, and soon the valley hums with call and response. It's soothing, hypnotic, almost like listening to monks at prayer, but these monks wear wool tunics and smell of smoke and manure. The cows respond, at least in part. A few turn their heads, ears twitching at familiar sounds. Others plod forward indifferently, proving that even in the Middle Ages, not every audience is attentive. You can't help but grin at the thought of medieval farmers essentially performing bedtime ASMR for cows. One herder, perhaps feeling playful, slips a joke into the chant. Little snorer, come along, or you'll miss the party. The others chuckle, their laughter puffing into the frigid air. Even amid harsh survival, humor sneaks in. You imagine the chant as a living playlist. Each name a track, an occasional joke like a remix drop to keep spirits alive. The rhythm draws you in. You walk beside the herd, letting the names wash over you. They blur together, forming a kind of lullaby in which Buttercup and Snowbear march alongside Rednose and Honeyhorn. Your boots crunch in time, and you begin to hum along, half embarrassed, half enchanted. As the herd moves, you notice how the chants also prevent quarrels. When everyone hears the names recited aloud, ownership is reinforced publicly. No one can later claim, that cow was mine. The whole valley just heard her name tied to her rightful owner. It's like notarization, but with singing. Historians still argue whether these communal performances doubled as legal evidence, or if that's reading too much into what was simply practical shepherding. Either way, you feel the strength of tradition in the air, humming through every syllable. The herd pauses at a stream, the cows lowering their heads to drink. Steam rises as their warm muzzles break the icy surface. The chants soften, then fade, leaving only the natural sounds. Water trickling, hose shifting, breath clouding in the air. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the crispness of it, and you feel drowsy, lulled by the cadence still echoing in your ears. For a moment, you imagine yourself as one of the herders, voice hoarse from calling, but warmed by the knowledge that your chant keeps order in a lawless landscape. You feel the absurd pride of knowing your cow's name is recognized not just in your home, but in the chorus of the community. And as you close your eyes briefly, letting the hum fade into memory, you realize the power in these names. They are less about cows and more about weaving humans together, making law, survival, and humor sing in the same breath. The herd spreads wide across a meadow dusted with frost, their bells clinking softly as they graze. You keep close to the farmers, boots sinking into spongy peat, when a sudden commotion rises. A calf has wandered too far, vanishing into the fog. The herders call out names, voices sharp with urgency, but the mist swallows their words. You feel your heart quicken. Not because of danger, but because this is exactly the kind of problem that Icelandic law courts existed to untangle. Mainstream fact. Disputes over lost or stray animals were common enough to be codified in Iceland's medieval law books. If a calf was found on another's pasture, ownership had to be proven, often by witnesses who could testify to its name. Quirky tidbit? Some stories describe farmers dragging calves into court, pointing to markings and insisting, "This is Snow Ear born under my roof." Judges had to listen, sometimes for hours, as neighbors recited lists of names to prove which animal was whose. Historians still argue whether judges actually believed the testimony or simply made rulings to keep peace. Even when proof was flimsy, back in the meadow, the fog curls around you like damp wool. Voices call, "Snow Ear, Snow Ear." You hear echoes, distant and eerie, as if the land itself is repeating the name. Finally, the calf stumbles back into view, legs awkward, ears twitching. Relief washes over the group, yet you realize how precarious this system is. If two calves looked alike, how easy it would be for one farmer to claim the other's by simply insisting on the right name. One herder jokes, "Next time, I'll call mine Crooked Nose," so no one mistakes him. The others laugh, shaking off the tension. You grin quietly, imagining medieval lawyers groaning at yet another case hinging on whether Snow Ear truly had a snow-white ear or merely a pale smudge. The fog thins as the sun nudges higher, though it never quite climbs. The calf presses against its mother, lowing softly, as if apologizing. You can't help but wonder, did the calf recognize its name in the chaos, or was it all coincidence? Historians still argue whether animals responded in names, or whether farmers convinced themselves they did, projecting meaning where there was none. Either way, the ritual mattered. Names created a thread of order in a world where animals, like the weather, seemed to belong to no one. The farmers gather again, murmuring relief. One pulls a small tally stick from his belt, carving the calf's name with quick, practiced strokes. It's another layer of proof, ready for the day when disputes might rise. You hear the rasp of knife on wood, a sound oddly satisfying the cold silence. You linger at the edge of the group, watching the calf nuzzle into straw, and you realize this moment is more than a pastoral mishap. It's a reminder that medieval law wasn't abstract parchment. It was lived in foggy fields, where a lost calf could spark arguments, fines, or even feuds. And yet, for now, the tension dissolves into laughter and relief. As you turn away, the meadow feels gentler. The chants resume, softer now, guiding the herd forward. You follow along, smiling faintly at the thought that somewhere, even today, a farmer might still call into the mist, trusting that a name can bring the lost home again. The herd settles again, and you drift toward the edge of the pasture, where the ground tilts upward into a rocky slope. A cluster of stones, arranged almost like an altar, catches your attention. Farmers linger there, voices hushed, as though the place remembers older rituals. When they speak of their cattle's names, there's a weight in the syllables, something that feels more than practical, something pagan that refuses to fade. Mainstream fact. Before Christianity took root in Iceland around the year 1000, Norse pagan traditions colored daily life, from law to farming. Animals were often tied to spiritual practices, whether in sacrifice or in symbolism. Quirky tidbit? Some scholars suggest that certain cow names bore echoes of pagan gods, like Thor's cow or Freya's heifer, hinting that people once believed divine favor could cling to a herd. Historians still argue whether these names were genuine continuations of pagan worship or simply cultural fossils, nicknames that lingered long after belief had shifted. You lean against a cold stone, listening. A farmer points proudly to his cow, calling her Risnot, Thor's cow. Another smirks and mutters that the bishop wouldn't approve. Yet the name persists, passed from tongue to tongue as though tradition itself refuses to vanish. You feel the tension. A land caught between two faiths, with cattle carrying the remnants of gods in their names. The air here feels older, thicker. You imagine 1,000 years earlier, a priest of Odin sprinkling blood over stones, dedicating a beast by name to ensure good pasture. Now, in the Christian age, the practice survives only in whispers. Still, the names echo. Snow Bear Starhide, Thor's cow, They blur the line between farmyard and myth. You chuckle softly, thinking of the irony. In a society trying to stamp out paganism, people still found ways to sneak it back in through cow names. It's like hiding a Norse saga in plain sight, grazing beside the churchyard. One farmer laughs and admits his cow has two names, one for the priest, one for his family. To the church, she's simply White Ear. At home, though, they call her Freya's Gift. Everyone chuckles, a shared secret carried on the cold wind. You can't help but smile, too, realizing that people have always been inventive when slipping around authority. The light fades as clouds gather, heavy and dark. You sense the farmers growing restless, pulling their cloaks tighter. Still, the names linger in the air, old gods stitched into syllables, neither fully alive nor fully gone. Historians still argue whether these names carried genuine belief or they were just echoes, fossils of a world already swallowed by Christianity. But in this moment, under the weight of the stones, you feel the power still humming in them, low and steady as the cattle themselves. The cows graze, indifferent, their jaws working slowly. You imagine Thor's cow lowering her head, chewing grass as if to say, "Gods or no gods, I'm still hungry." The thought makes you grin. Even here, where myth collides with law, humor sneaks in, reminding you that names may carry ancient echoes, but cows remain cows. The clouds hang low, gray and heavy, when you hear the toll of a small church bell carried across the wind. You follow the sound, passing through a cluster of turf houses, until you reach a modest wooden chapel, its roof sagging under damp moss. Outside, a bishop in wool and fur lectures a knot of farmers, his voice sharp against the hush of the land. You realize he isn't talking about scripture alone. He's warning against certain cow names. Mainstream fact. After Iceland's official conversion to Christianity in the year 1000, the church gradually pressed against older traditions, shaping everything from holidays to naming customs. Priests tried to redirect pagan references, insisting on Christian names or saintly associations. Quirky tidbit. Records hint that some bishops condemned names like Thor's cow, calling them sinful relics. At the same time, they suggested alternatives like Mary's Gift or St. Olaf's Heifer. Historians still argue whether this was strictly enforced or largely ignored by stubborn farmers who clung to older habits. You stand at the edge of the crowd, watching the bishop's lips move as he scolds. His staff strikes the earth for emphasis. No cow shall bear the name of false gods. The Lord does not bless Thor's cow. Farmers shuffle their feet, nodding politely, but you can almost feel their eyes rolling beneath their hoods. Out in the pasture, Thor's cow is chewing cud without a care. A farmer mutters under his breath, "Call her what you like at church." At home, she's still Thor's cow. His neighbor smirks, hiding laughter in his cloak. You grin quietly. This is medieval passive aggression at its finest. Smile for the bishop, then go home and whisper Freya's name in the cow sheet. The bishop suggests saintly alternatives. He raises a hand and intones, "Better to name them after God's servants. Let there be Mary's Gift, Joseph's cow, Olaf's heifer." The farmers murmur their assent, though you suspect half of them will ignore him once he leaves. It's not unlike being told to rename your Wi-Fi holy network when you've grown fond of Viking rage. One woman, bold-eyed, lifts her chin and asks, "And if my cow was born during lightning?" The bishop frowns, sensing the trap. The crowd chuckles softly. You feel the tension. Tradition and religion pushing against each other, with cows caught in the middle. Inside the chapel, the faint smell of beeswax mingles with damp wood. Candles flicker, casting long shadows on the plank walls. You imagine the priest writing in his records, "Olaf's heifer, Mary's Gift." Yet outside, tally sticks and family memories still carry Thor's cow, Freya's Gift. Two worlds coexisting, awkwardly but stubbornly. Historians still argue whether Christianity fully erased pagan animal names, or whether it merely layered new ones on top, like fresh turf on an old roof. What you see tonight feels like compromise, public piety, private stubbornness. And somewhere in between, cows keep chewing, as indifferent to bishops as they were to pagan priests. As the bell tolls again, farmers disperse. Some bow, some mutter, some smile slyly. You step aside, letting them pass, and glance back at the chapel. Its candlelight glows faintly in the gloom, a fragile flame trying to outshine the long memory of names whispered in barns. The bishop's voice fades with the wind, but you can still hear the muttered refrain. Thor's cow, Freya's gift. Old gods refuse to leave easily, not when they've already been carved into the syllables of everyday life. You trail behind a dispersing crowd, their cloaks vanishing into the twilight, and soon you find yourself inside another longhouse where the air is thicker, warmer, and alive with voices. People are gathered around the fire, not for law or lectures, but for stories. An old man leans forward, eyes shining in the firelight, his voice weaving sagas that curl through the smoky rafters. Tonight, it's not warriors or kings who take center stage, but cows, named, remembered, immortalized in legend. Mainstream fact, Iceland sagas, though mostly centered on human drama, often included references to livestock. Cows and sheep symbolize wealth status, and sometimes played surprising roles in the unfolding of feuds and journeys. Quirky tidbit, a few sagas even preserve the names of particular animals, suggesting that the storytellers considered them worthy of remembrance alongside heroes. Historians still argue whether these animal references were meant literally or served as metaphors. Was Milkwhite an actual cow, or a symbol of abundance in narrative form? You huddle closer as the old man begins. Once there was a cow called Goldhorn, whose milk could fill barrels by itself. And when the farmer's enemies came, she bellowed so loudly they thought Thor himself was striking the sky. The crowd chuckles, not because they believe it, but because the exaggeration feels familiar, like an old joke retold. You can't help smiling, picturing Goldhorn as a four-legged superhero, cape fluttering behind her in the Icelandic wind. The sagas slip between fact and fancy. One tale claims a cow named Bright Ear guided its owner out of a snowstorm, her lowing leading him safely home. Another insists that a cow called Flamehide kicked a thief so hard he limped for life. You glance around the room, noticing how the listeners nod along as though every name carries a shard of truth, however small. The fire crackles, casting sparks into the gloom. Children lean forward, wide-eyed, while elders exchange knowing glances. You realize that names serve not only legal or practical purposes, but also become anchors in stories, hooks that keep cows from fading into anonymity. By naming them, farmers ensured their beasts could march into sagas, immortalized alongside warriors and chieftains. And of course, there's humor. One man interrupts, laughing. Did you hear the one about Longtail? He lost his tail in the river, yet they still called him Longtail for the rest of his days. The room erupts in laughter, the kind of hearty amusement that cuts through the gloom of endless winters. You laugh too, the absurdity fitting perfectly into the strange, gentle storytelling. As the tales unfurl, you feel yourself drifting. The rhythm of the old man's voice blends with the lowing of cows outside, with the hiss of smoke rising, with the shuffling of feet on earthen floors. The sagas are less about truth than about keeping the dark at bay, about filling long nights with words and warmth. Historians still argue whether saga cow names are preserved as faithful memory or as narrative color, chosen to give texture to otherwise mundane details. But here, in the flicker of firelight, that debate doesn't matter. What matters is that names live on, rolling off tongues, tying people to animals to stories, and stories to survival. You rest your head against a timber post, eyelids heavy, listening to Goldhorn bellow in the saga, to Bright Ear lead a farmer home, to Flamehide kick a thief. The cows are heroes tonight, and their names ring in your ears like soft bells in the dark. The fire in the longhouse dwindles, its embers glowing faintly as the stories trail off into yawns and soft laughter. You step back into the night air, colder now, and follow a narrow path that leads toward a cluster of barns. There you see farmers leaning on fences, watching their herds with a kind of quiet pride. They aren't arguing, nor are they telling sagas. This is a different mood altogether. You realize you're witnessing how a cow's very name becomes a symbol of status, stitched into family pride, like embroidery on a cloak. Mainstream fact. In medieval Iceland, livestock wasn't just food on four legs. It was wealth. A man's social standing could be measured in cattle, with names acting as a shorthand for lineage and prosperity. Quirky tidbit. Some families named cows after admired ancestors, hoping the prestige would rub off, while others used names to mock rivals, ensuring their own herd stood taller by comparison. Historians still argue whether this naming habit was a conscious strategy for displaying status or simply a natural extension of oral tradition. You watch as one farmer calls out, "Come, Bright Ear." His neighbor nods, impressed. Bright Ear isn't just a cow. She's a trophy, proof that the family owns animals worth naming with elegance. Another farmer, not to be outdone, strokes the back of his cow and announces her name loudly. "Milkwhite, daughter of Flame Hide." You hear the bragging tone and realize the name functions almost like a medieval pedigree chart. You smirk, recognizing the pattern. It's like parents today competing over baby names. Unique, dignified, memorable. Except here. The competition unfolds in fields where frost bites at the grass and survival is always just a season away. And yes, people judged. A man with a herd full of crooked horns and little snorers might raise eyebrows, while a herd of starhides and gold horns whisper prestige. There's humor, too. One boy boasts about his family's cow, only for another to snicker. "That's no gold horn, that's fat tail." The group bursts out laughing, the tension dissolving into camaraderie. You chuckle quietly, realizing playground teasing of children extends across centuries, even when the subject is cattle. As the farmers swap tales of their cows' names, you feel the undercurrent of pride ripple through the night. To name a cow well is to show care, to signal wealth, to anchor family memory. It's less about milk and more about meaning. You lean against a post, half drowsy, listening to names roll off tongues like poems. Bright Ear, Starhide, Flamehide, Milkwhite. Historians still argue whether these names reflected deep-seated beliefs in the symbolic power of words, or whether they were simply practical identifiers elevated into tradition. Standing here, though, you sense both. The names are tools, yes, but they're also mirrors of pride, identity, and the human need to make meaning out of the ordinary. The cows graze quietly, indifferent to their role in the social theater. Their jaws move, eyes half-lidded, tails flicking lazily. You smile at the irony. Farmers are locked in a subtle arms race of names, while the cows themselves only care about the next patch of grass. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the bite of the wind. Pride lingers in the air, heavier than the smoke of turf fires, stitched into every syllable spoken across the pasture. For these farmers, naming is not only law but legacy, and as you drift into the rhythm of their words, you realize that even here, on this cold edge of the world, status is written not in parchment or coin, but in the names whispered into the ears of cows. The path bends toward a bustling field lit by scattered torches, and the air shifts from quiet pride to noisy barter. You stumbled into a trading fair, the kind that blooms briefly each summer when farmers, craftsmen, and wanderers gather to exchange goods. The smell of fish mingles with smoke, the clink of iron tools rings out, and above it all, you hear cow names shouted like market slogans. Mainstream fact. Medieval Iceland's economy was largely barter-based, with livestock serving as one of the most valuable trade items. Cattle were exchanged for wool, fish tools, and sometimes even ships. Quirky tidbit? Some fairs included public announcements of animals' names, shouted over the din to confirm ownership during the sale. Imagine a medieval auctioneer reciting, "Buttercup, daughter of Redhorn, sold for 1 barrel of dried cod." Historians still argue whether these public name shoutings were standard procedure or rare moments preserved in saga anecdotes. You weave through the crowd, ears pricked as voices rise above the chatter. A farmer bellows, "Goldhorn, fine milk, 3 summers strong." The buyer squints, nods, and asks about lineage, as though this cow were nobility. Another seller counters loudly with, "Starhide, proven calf bearer, never lost in pasture." The names carry across the fair like banners, each syllable a guarantee of value. You can't help smiling at the absurdity. It's as if the cows themselves are celebrities walking a red carpet, their names shouted to prove their worth. A woman even pats her cow and coos, "Bright Ear, show them your shine," as though the beast understands its auditioning. The cow flicks her ear lazily, more interested in hate than fame. That's your moment of humor. Cows as unwilling divas of the barter scene. The fair itself is alive with color. Tents striped with dyed cloth, barrels stacked high with salted fish, piles of wool sheared and bundled like sleeping dogs. Children chase each other between stalls, while elders haggle sternly over the measure of butter. Through it all, cow names keep surfacing, punctuating the noise like drum beats. You pause near a scribe's table, where transactions are being recorded. His quill scratches as he writes, "Buttercup traded for 20 fish barrels." You imagine him stifling a sigh, thinking, "Another Buttercup? How many of these do I have to write today?" The repetition is almost comical, a medieval version of filing identical receipts. Historians still argue whether scribes try to standardize these records or whether they simply let the chaos of multiple Buttercups and red noses pile up on the page. A gust of wind rattles the torches, and shadows leap across the crowd. Yet the fair hums on, voices rising and falling, coins clinking in rare exchanges, more often butter changing hands. You see pride in every trade. Names shouted not only to secure deals, but to show off, to boast, to remind neighbors that this herd carries memory and honor. As the night deepens, music joins the noise, someone plucking a fiddle-like instrument, others clapping in rhythm. The cow names soften in the background hum, blending with laughter and song. You breathe it in, realizing you're drifting again, lulled by the cadence of society where even in trade, names bind people animals, animals to stories, stories to law. You lean against the post, eyes heavy, and watch Buttercup's new owner lead her away into the shadows. The name is shouted one last time, sealing the deal. Then it fades, absorbed into the dark hum of the fair, one more syllable woven into Iceland's peculiar, endless naming tradition. The fair fade behind you, its torches dwindling to sparks against the long horizon. You wander down a narrow track that hugs the shoreline, where the sea slaps against black rock with the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. A group of men huddle by a ship drawn up on the beach, their cloaks snapping in the wind. You drift closer and notice something odd. Alongside tallies of wool and fish, they're carefully noting cow names into their cargo lists. Mainstream fact: while Iceland depended heavily on exports of wool and fish, ships sometimes recorded livestock too, especially when herds were traded or transported. Legal documents from the period occasionally include animal names, linking them to owners for taxation or dispute settlement. Quirky tidbit: a few ship records that survive from later centuries show absurdly specific notes, such as a cow named Milkfoot listed beside barrels of dried cod. Historians still argue whether these names serve practical shipping needs, or scribes simply enjoyed inserting colorful details into dull manifests. You squat near the men, watching the ink glisten under a flickering lamp. One sailor mutters as he writes, "Buttercup, daughter of Bright Ear, traded for salted herring." Another adds, "Crooked Horn, delivered with scar on left flank." The detail feels almost tender, as though the cows are passengers with their own passports. You can't help but smile, picturing a medieval customs officer peering at a cow and saying, "Ah yes, Crooked Horn, you may board." The sailors argue briefly about spelling. One insists on red nose, another insists it should be Ronif. Their bickering echoes like the sea, another reminder that even in law and trade, language itself was fluid. You shake your head, amused, realizing this is the medieval equivalent of debating whether to write your name with one N or two on a boarding pass. The night deepens, but the work continues. Bundles of wool are stacked neatly, fish barrels sealed tight with tar, and in between them, cows snore impatiently, their names inked onto vellum, as though they were noble guests. The contrast is striking. Law, economy, and livestock all crammed together in the cramped belly of a ship. You chuckle softly as a sailor pats one cow's flank and says, "Milk White, don't you dare get seasick." The others laugh, shaking their heads, but the joke lightens the burden of the work. You imagine Milk White staring blankly at the waves, unimpressed by her promotion from barn to cargo hold. Historians still argue whether these name-laden records were strictly followed at sea, or if cows were quickly reduced to one brown, one white, once the ship left port. The surviving documents, though, suggest that names mattered enough to be written down, etched into the trade routes that tied Iceland to Norway and beyond. The surf pounds the rocks, steady and hypnotic. You lean against the barrel, eyelids heavy, and let the voices drift over you. Lists of names, lists of goods, lists of promises. It's strange comfort, this mixture of law and livestock. The cows low softly, their names murmured into ink, their presence stitched in a trade as firmly as wool and fish. Above you, the stars glimmer, scattered like silver across black velvet. The sailors glance upward too, muttering prayers or curses, while their quills keep scratching. Buttercup, Crooked Horn, Milk White, 3 cows now bound not only by pasture but by parchment, carried into history on the back of ships. The shoreline fade behind you as you wander inland again, drawn by a sound softer than trade shouts or legal chants. In the distance, a melody carries through the night, gentle, lilting, almost like a lullaby. You crest a small rise and find a family gathered by the hearth outside their turf house. A woman hums while rocking a child, her song weaving cow names into the rhythm. Mainstream fact: medieval Icelandic folk songs often blended daily life with memory. Cows, sheep, and even fishing boats were sung into verses, turning practical details into oral tradition. Quirky tidbit: some fragments suggest that cow names slipped into lullabies as playful rhymes, teaching children both language and ownership. Historians still argue whether these songs were truly common in households or simply preserved in a handful of unique families. You sit quietly on the grass, listening. The woman's voice drifts into the night. Bright Ear, Buttercup, Snow Bear White, come home safe by morning light. The child giggles sleepily, repeating Buttercup under his breath. You smile, realizing this is as much mnemonic as melody, a way to plant cow names into memory before the child can even walk. In a world where oral tradition was the backbone of law, every whispered name mattered. A man joins in, his voice rough but steady, turning the lullaby into a duet. He adds verses, teasing gently. Crooked Horn, who snores at night, don't scare the sheep with your silly fright. The crowd chuckles, and you can't help laughing softly yourself. Humor again, stitched neatly into the cadence of survival. Even bedtime songs doubled as playful reminders of quirks. Who snores, who strays, who shines. The music drifts through the meadow, blending with the lowing of real cows nearby. The animals seem half attentive, flicking their ears, chewing slowly, as if they too recognize the lullaby. You imagine Buttercup nodding her head, half in rhythm, half in boredom. The melody slows, stretching into a hum. The fire pops, sparks drifting into the dark sky. Children curl into blankets, their breathing softening to match the rhythm of the song. You feel your own eyelids droop, lulled by the repetition of names now softened into music. Historians still argue whether these folk songs held legal weight. Did repeating a cow's name at bedtime count as evidence of ownership? Should a dispute arise? Or were these simply family traditions, never meant to reach the ears of judges? The line between law and lullaby blurs here, as much as the line between night and morning. The parents share a glance, proud and tired. Their child is asleep now, dreams surely filled with cows parading through meadows, each name stitched into song. You lean back on the cool grass, letting the melody echo in your mind. Bright Ear, Buttercup, Crooked Horn, Snow Bear. The names become less like identifiers and more like spells, gentle charms keeping darkness away. The night deepens, stars prickling the sky. The fire burns low, but the warmth of the song lingers, soft and steady. You close your eyes for a moment, content to let the lullaby carry you deeper into this peculiar world where even cows have verses written for them. The lullaby fades into the night, but the echoes follow you as you drift along a narrow track that winds between boulders. Soon, laughter rises from ahead. Coarse, easy laughter, the kind that rolls out of bellies and rattles against wooden beams. You push open the turf door of a farmhouse and step into a smoky hall where farmers sit with mugs of ale, trading not cattle but jokes. Tonight's entertainment, the most absurd cow names anyone has ever heard. Mainstream fact: humor thrived in medieval Iceland, even in law. The sagas themselves mix grim feuds with sly jokes, reminding us that people have always laughed at the ridiculous. Quirky tidbit: a handful of manuscript preserved names so exaggerated that scholars wonder if they were parodies, like Long Nose with a Bent Horn or Buttercup Who Fell in the River. Historians still argue whether these were ever real cow names or simply comic inventions shared around the hearth. One farmer slaps the table and declares, "My uncle once named his cow Priest Pants because she wouldn't stay put." The hall explodes with laughter, ale sloshing from mugs. You nearly choke, holding back your grin. Another adds, "And we had one called Stumbles Between Fences. She lived up to it, too." The laughter builds again, filling the hall with warmth that no turf fire alone could provide. You notice a rhythm to it, the way each man tries to outdo the last, names piling higher into absurdity. "Hornless horn," someone yells. "Silent bell," another cries. A woman from the far corner raises her voice and earns the loudest laugh. "Little snorer," she shook the whole barn with her nose. You realize you've heard this one before, whispered in barns and sagas. Proof that humor traveled as widely as cows themselves. The cows outside, of course, remain indifferent. You glance through a smoke hole and see them chewing steadily, tails swishing, as though the punchlines bounce right off their hides. The contrast makes you grin even more. There's a lightness here that catches you off guard. After hours of law, trade, and sagas, it feels good to hear simple laughter, the kind that comes from mocking the very system they all depend on. You wonder if this was half the point. Poking fun at the bureaucracy of names, even while still honoring its rules. It's like the medieval version of workplace humor. Yes, the law says it matters, but isn't it ridiculous? Historians still argue whether these outlandish names were ever shouted at Delingi or confined to fireside jokes. Some suggest they were deliberate satire, mocking neighbors who took naming too seriously. Others think they were real, farmers finding humor in necessity. The truth, as always, is murky, and you let yourself enjoy the ambiguity. The laughter slows, ale mugs emptying. One man wipes his eyes and mutters, "Say what you will, but names keep peace." The hall nods, the humor giving way to quiet agreement. Beneath the absurdity lies truth. Even silly names like Priest Pants carried weight, anchoring ownership and identity. The fire cracks low, shadows deepening across the walls. You feel your shoulders relax, warm not just by the hearth, but by the knowledge that even in the darkest winters, Icelanders carved out moments of joy. The names, however absurd, became threads in the tapestry of survival. You lean back, eyes half shut, still chuckling faintly at Stumbles Between Fences, and realize you've stumbled onto something universal. Humans have always needed to laugh at the rules they live by, even if those rules involve cows with the strangest names imaginable. The laughter fades behind you as you step into the icy night again. Stars glittering like chips of glass scattered across black velvet. The road ahead dips into a valley where a group of travelers has pitched tents. Their cloaks are fur-lined, their speech sharp and unfamiliar. You draw closer and catch their accents. Norwegians, visiting traders who come to barter fish and timber for Icelandic wool. They look bewildered, almost amused, as a local farmer patiently explains the rules about cow names. Mainstream fact: Iceland's legal culture was unique in medieval Europe. While neighbors in Norway and beyond relied more on lords and written charters, Icelanders operated through oral law, memorized codes, and quirky details like livestock naming. Quirky tidbit: accounts revive of foreigners struggling to understand Iceland's obsession with verbal identity markers. What seemed common sense to locals struck outsiders as baffling. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerated satire or genuine records of cultural confusion. You crouch by a tent flap and listen. A Norwegian merchant frowns and says, "So you find a man for calling 2 cows Buttercup?" His Icelandic host nods gravely. The merchant bursts out laughing, slapping his knee and sputters, "In Bergen, we just paint their horns different colors." The Icelanders shrug, unimpressed. To them, names are the law. To outsiders, it's comedy. One young Norwegian tries to get it right, repeating the names aloud. Bright Ear, Snow Bear, Honeyhorn. But he mangles the Icelandic sound so badly that the farmers double over in laughter. You can't help but chuckle, too, imagining this poor foreigner in court mispronouncing Buttercup into something like Buttcup and losing his case instantly. The conversation grows heated. The merchant insists that such rules are inefficient, slowing trade. The Icelanders counter that names prevent feuds, saving lives. You sense the cultural chasm yawning wide. As though law itself is a language, and neither side fully speaks the others. The cows, grazing nearby, flick their ears at the noise, utterly uninterested in cross-cultural misunderstandings. You realize how strange this must seem to outsiders. Why put so much weight on names? Why not mark animals with paint, brands, or notches? But here in Iceland, where resources are scarce and identity flows through speech and memory, names carry more permanence than marks that fade. Historians still argue whether Icelanders resisted foreign methods out of stubborn pride or sheer practicality. The Norwegians finally shrug, muttering, "If it works for you." They trade their timber, load wool bales onto sledges, and leave shaking their heads. The Icelanders grin, satisfied. They've kept their rules intact, even if the foreigners think them foolish. As you watch the Norwegians disappear into the night, you feel a curious pride on behalf of the locals. Their system may seem absurd, but it is theirs, woven into law, story, song, and daily life. To dismiss it as silly is to miss the heart of how they survive. The stars glitter colder now, and you pull your cloak tight. In the silence left behind, you still hear echoes of mispronounced names, of laughter bridging confusion, of rules defended with stubborn pride. The night swallows the sound, but the memory lingers, proof that even in a world of trade and travel, Iceland's cow laws remain stubbornly, beautifully peculiar. The Norwegians' laughter still echoes faintly in your ears as you follow a winding trail back toward the heart of the island. The land feels quiet again, open, windswept, and heavy with silence. You pause at a farmhouse where an old man sits on a bench, carving runes into a stick of driftwood. He beckons you closer, nodding toward the cattle grazing nearby. "Names," he mutters, change like the wind, but words carry their own weather. Mainstream fact: the Icelandic language has preserved ancient forms more faithfully than most European tongues. But even so, medieval Icelanders watch words evolve, shifting subtly from generation to generation. Quirky tidbit: some cow names recorded in early sagas reappear centuries later in softened, altered versions. Sinjabjorn, snow bear, becoming Sinjabjarn or Sinjoy. Historians still argue whether these changes reflect natural linguistic drift or scribes cleaning up awkward syllables when copying manuscripts. The old man demonstrates by chanting a list of cow names, each syllable thick with age. He says, "Once she was Ronov, red nose. Now my grandson calls her Rana," as if the nose shrank with time. He chuckles, and you catch the humor, names morphing like gossip, trimmed, bent, reshaped until even cows were nicknames. You smile, recognizing the timeless habit. Humans shortening, twisting, and remaking words just to suit the tongue. A boy trots up breathless, calling a calf Sinjoy. The grandfather scolds him gently. "It's Sinjabjorn." The boy rolls his eyes, mutters, "Too long," and runs off again. You laugh softly. Generational battles over slang, it seems, have always existed. Even if the slang is about cattle, the cows themselves don't mind. Red Nose flicks her ear at either version, indifferent to her linguistic evolution. You imagine her thinking, "Call me what you like, I still chew grass." That's your third joke, tucked in like a wink from the past. The old man keeps carving, etching runes into the wood. He explains that some families recorded names this way, not just to remember ownership, but to preserve them against the erosion of speech. "Runes hold fast," he says. Tongue slip. You study the stick, its lines neat but worn, and wonder how many names have vanished from memory because no hand carved them in time. Historians still argue whether such rune-carved tallies were widely used or whether they were symbolic, meant more for ritual than record. Either way, the image lingers. Fragile syllables locked into sturdy wood, trying to outlast winters. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of salt and sheep. You lean back against the turf wall, half dozing as the old man drones on about the words of his youth, about names that have already vanished from the land. His voice is rough, but there's a lull in it, a rhythm that feels like the slow drift of language itself. Inevitable, unstoppable, strangely soothing. As your eyes close, you hear him whisper, "Words change, but we remember." His chant fades into the wind, and the cows graze on, their names bending like reeds but never fully breaking. You walk further inland, the wind colder now, carrying a faint smell of hay mixed with smoke. The trail brings you to a weathered barn, its timbers dark with age. Inside, the air is warm and heavy, thick with the scent of dung and straw. Farmers move quietly among the cows, laying down fresh bedding. But your eyes are drawn upward, to the beams overhead, where faint carvings glimmer in the lantern light. You step closer and realize they are runes scratched deep into the wood, spelling out names. Mainstream fact. Runes were still in use in Iceland long after Christianity arrived, employed not only for charms and inscriptions but for everyday marks. Some barns and tools bear runic etchings, connecting work with both memory and ritual. Quirky tidbit. Folklore suggests farmers sometimes carve secret names above stalls to bind a cow's identity, ensuring no thief or rival could dispute ownership. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were truly legal evidence or just protective superstitions kept alive in the dim light of barns. You run your fingers across one beam. The groove spell Ranif, red nose. Another beam carries Njokovich, milk white. Some names are neat, deliberate, while others are rushed, almost childlike. It feels intimate, like stumbling upon graffiti written by generations who wanted their cows to be remembered by something sturdier than memory. The farmers don't comment. They work quietly, as if these names are too ordinary, too sacred, to explain. A boy leads in a calf, and his father whispers the name Stjornuskin, Starhide. Later, when the barn grows silent, you watch him carve the word into the timber above the stall. The knife scrapes slowly, each stroke a promise. This cow belongs here. This name will not vanish. You grin faintly at the thought. Medieval Icelandic barns doubling as notaries' offices, their rafters covered in legal graffiti. It's half practical, half mystical. A thief could deny hearing a name shouted in a field, but he couldn't erase the runes above a stall without someone noticing. And maybe, just maybe, the farmers believed the carvings had power, binding the cow to them through wood and word alike. There's humor hidden here, too. One faint carving, almost worn away, reads something like snark nose. You imagine the farmer smirking as he cut the letters, laughing at his own private joke, while pretending it was serious business. You chuckle quietly, realizing that even in solemn barns, people couldn't resist sneaking in a silly name or two. Historians still argue whether such carvings were widespread across Iceland or confined to particular valleys where oral tradition mixed more freely with superstition. But standing under the beams, you feel the weight of names hanging above you like stars, each rune a tiny constellation marking not heaven, but herd. The cows shift in their stalls, bells chiming softly, as though they recognize the names etched above them. You close your eyes, listening to the scrape of knives still echoing faintly, even centuries later. The barn creaks, the straw rustles, and the carved names glow in the lantern light. Quiet guardians against forgetfulness. You lean against a post, eyelids heavy, and let the murmured syllables and carved letters drift together until they blur, carrying you deeper into the strange, soothing world where even barns hum with names. The barn air lingers in your clothes as you step outside, the night sharp with frost. Your boots crunch over frozen ground until you hear raised voices by the edge of a pasture. Lanterns sway in the dark, throwing long shadows across the snow. Two farmers stand nose to nose, their breaths steaming, their fists clenched. Around them, neighbors murmur nervously, sensing that this quarrel isn't about sheep or hay. It's about a cow and her name. Mainstream fact. Disputes in medieval Iceland could escalate quickly, sometimes turning from legal quarrels into blood feuds. Law existed to prevent this, but pride was as much a force as parchment or memory. Quirky tidbit. At least one saga describes men nearly dueling over who owned a cow with a contested name, though the story may have been exaggerated to highlight the absurd lengths of honor culture. Historians still argue whether such duels ever truly occurred, or were literary devices meant to mock stubborn farmers. You draw closer, careful not to intrude. The taller farmer shouts, "She is Honey Nose, mine since calving." The other jabs a finger, retorting, "Honey Nose was named by my father before you were born." The crowd gasps at the insult, because in this world, dishonoring someone's lineage is nearly as grave as theft. A third man steps forward, hand resting nervously on the hilt of his axe. You feel tension coil in the air, heavy and brittle. It's ridiculous, you think, to risk blood over syllables. Yet in this society, names aren't just words. They're property, proof, and pride wound together. Someone mutters a joke. Next they'll duel over Buttercup. But no one laughs. The lantern light flickers across sharp steel and sharper pride. Your pulse quickens, though you're only a dream walker in this scene. At last, a magistrate arrives, cloak flapping in the cold wind. His voice cuts through the crowd. Enough! This will not be settled with blades. He orders both men to bring witnesses to the next inn, where the matter can be judged properly. The crowd exhales in relief. The axe is lowered, the fists unclench, but the anger lingers like smoke in the air. You realize that for these farmers, to lose the name Honeynose is to lose a piece of themselves, of their honor. It's not unlike losing a family heirloom. And though tonight ends without blood, you know how fragile peace is when pride and law collide. The cows nearby chew calmly, their eyes reflecting lantern light. One of them flicks her ear at the sound of Honeynose, indifferent to the storm her name has stirred. You can't help but smirk at the irony. An entire valley bristling with tension, while the cow herself just wants more hay. Historians still argue whether sagas exaggerated these moments to satirize Icelandic stubbornness, or whether men truly stood on the brink of duels over livestock. Either way, you feel the truth in the air. In this land, words carry blades sharper than iron. The lanterns dim as the crowd disperses. You walk away slowly, heart still beating fast, amused and unsettled by how close laughter and violence live together under Iceland's dark sky. The valley grows quiet again, though the tension of the quarrel clings to the air like mist. You follow a winding track back toward the Ilingi plain, where a crowd is gathered once more. Lanterns flicker, voices rise, and in the center sit the magistrates, cloaks pulled tight against the cold. They look tired, their eyes hollow, as if weighed down by the endless stream of disputes. You take your place among the listeners and realize you're about to witness another long session where names are debated, recorded, and judged. Mainstream fact: Icelandic magistrates presided over countless cases each year, ranging from murder feuds to property disputes. Yet livestock cases, though seemingly trivial, could consume just as much attention, because wealth depended on them. Quirky tidbit? Some annals hinted judges becoming visibly weary during such sessions, dozing off or rushing decisions when yet another Buttercup or Snowier case arrived. Historians still argue whether these accounts reveal actual court fatigue or are later literary jabs poking fun at bureaucracy. The first farmer steps forward, his voice booming. Bright Ear is mine, named last spring, witnessed by neighbors. The second interrupts immediately. Bright Ear was named by my family 2 winters ago. The crowd groans, and you feel the exhaustion ripple outward. A scribe scratches notes with an expression so blank you wonder if he's imagining himself anywhere else. Maybe fishing, maybe asleep. The magistrate pinches the bridge of his nose. Do you have witnesses? He asks in a monotone. 2 men shuffle forward, offering half-hearted testimony, while the cow herself waits tethered nearby, chewing cud. You glance at her, amused. She looks utterly unbothered by the courtroom drama revolving around her ears. A boy in the crowd mutters a joke. Perhaps we should ask the cow who she belongs to. The people around him snicker softly, but the magistrate doesn't even flinch. His eyes droop, his voice flat, his patience stretched thin. You realize you're watching not just justice, but the sheer fatigue of men tasked with treating every cow name as a matter of law. The session drags on. More names are called. Snow Bear, Milk White, Crooked Horn, each with its own backstory, each with its own dispute. The magistrate's cloaks sag heavier by the hour. At one point, you swear one of them yawns mid-sentence. The scribe rubs his eyes and dips his quill again, ink smudging the page. Historians still argue whether Iceland's legal system was ingenious or absurd, balancing freedom and fairness, or drowning itself in minutiae. Tonight, you feel the latter. The weight of bureaucracy presses like the cold, suffocating yet oddly lulling, its monotony pulling at your eyelids. You smile faintly at the absurdity. Judges yawning, scribes sighing, farmers bickering, cows chewing, all wrapped in solemnity. It's almost comical, yet entirely human. Law here isn't dramatic spectacle, but endless repetition, grinding away until disputes dull themselves into surrender. Finally, the magistrate bangs a staff against the ground. Enough. The name Bright Ear belongs to the first claimant. Fines is set. His voice trails like an echo, more weary than authoritative. The farmers bow, grumble, and shuffle away. Another case begins immediately, as if no one has the strength to pause. You step back from the crowd, your breath misting in the night air. The scene leaves you half amused, half drowsy. You just witness law not as glory, but as tedium, an endless cycle of yawns, names, and cud-chewing cows. And somehow, that monotony is soothing, like a lullaby disguised as bureaucracy. The long night drags on, and you wander into the quieter corner of a chieftain's hall, where scholars and scribes huddle over stacks of vellum. The torches sputter, shadows bending across tired faces. You watch as they pore over manuscripts, flipping pages filled with laws, sagas, and livestock records. The atmosphere is hushed, almost reverent, yet tinged with frustration. Their fingers trace lines where names once stood clear but now blur into smudges, half erased by time or careless ink. Mainstream fact. Many of Iceland's medieval manuscripts were recopied repeatedly, with errors creeping in as scribes struggled with fading originals. Livestock records, including cow names, were sometimes preserved, though not always consistently. Quirky tidbit: modern scholars have uncovered cases where two different manuscripts preserve entirely different cow names for the same passage, suggesting that scribes either misheard, misremembered, or simply improvised. Historians still argue whether these variations represent genuine local differences or scribal sloppiness. One scribe sighs heavily, muttering, "Is that milk white or white milk?" Another rubs his eyes and says, "It doesn't matter, they're both cows." The scholars groan at his irreverence, though you can't help but grin. You imagine future historians losing sleep over whether a particular cow in a saga was milk white, white milk, or perhaps just badly smeared ink. You glance at the parchment spread out before them. Faint marks suggest a name once proudly recorded, now scratched thin by centuries of handling. The scribe tilts the page toward the firelight, squinting. Could be crooked horn, he guesses, or broken horn. A heated discussion follows, as though a cow lost at times still demands attention. You stifle a laugh, realizing that medieval scholars were just as pedantic as their modern descendants. And then the humor turns poignant. One scholar laments, "These names were lives, wealth, memory. To lose them is to lose the past." You feel the weight in his words. For all the joking, the vanished names represent vanished people, vanished herds, vanished winters endured. Each half-erased syllable is a ghost. The scribes dip quills again, carefully rewriting names with deliberate strokes. The room smells of ink and tallow, of sleep long deferred. A boy apprentice yawns loudly, earning a scowl, but soon even the elder scholars are nodding, their heads drooping closer to parchment. The monotony of transcription, the endless list of names, works like a lullaby. Historians still argue whether manuscripts with conflicting names should be trusted as evidence of real practice or treated as literary inventions. Watching the scribes now, you realize the truth may be both. Some names were accurate, others accidental, and all of them became part of the strange tapestry of Icelandic law. You lean back against the cold wall, eyes heavy. The fire pops, scattering sparks across the floor, and the rhythm of scratching quills becomes almost hypnotic. Milk white, white milk, crooked horn, broken horn. The names repeat like a chant, blurring into one another. You close your eyes and let the scholars' debate fade into a steady hum, their voices as drowsy and persistent as the cows they try to remember. The scholars' whispers fade behind you as you step back into the cold night. Stars scatter like silver dust across the dark sky. A pale glow leaks from a farmhouse nearby, drawing you in. Inside, the air is thick with butter and smoke. You find a woman at a churn, arms moving rhythmically, the creak of wood echoing in the dim room. Beside her, a child hums while shaping pats of butter, and in the background, a man mutters names under his breath as he tends to the cows penned in the same hall. Mainstream fact. In medieval Iceland, cows were central to daily life, not only for milk and meat, but for butter and cheese, which were crucial trade goods in winter stores. Quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that farmers repeated their animals' names while working with dairy, as if reminding themselves of each beast's contribution. It was part bookkeeping, part habit, and maybe even part superstition. Historians still argue whether these mutterings were functional tallies or ritual-like chants. You lean against a beam, watching. The woman churns steadily, sweat on her brow despite the cold seeping to the turf walls. With each push, her husband whispers, "Buttercup, milk white, crooked horn." His voice is flat, not meant for conversation, just a rhythm syncing memory with labor. You feel yourself swaying slightly, as if the list itself were a song. The child, perhaps bored, adds names of her own invention. Star ear, funny nose, long tail. The adults chuckle softly, though the father shakes his head. Those aren't the legal names. Still, the girl's creativity lingers, proof that naming isn't just law but play. You smile quietly, realizing that even in a harsh world, children smuggle joy into routines. The smell of churned butter fills the room, rich and calming. You imagine each pat of butter carrying not just flavor but identity. Buttercup's milk, red-nosed cream, bright tears richness. In a land where food meant survival, time produced to name cows reinforced gratitude and ownership alike. It wasn't just butter, it was Buttercup's butter. There's humor here too. The child suddenly blurts out, "This one tastes like Crooked Horn's nose." The room erupts in laughter, and you can't help laughing with them. It's absurd, but it breaks the monotony. Even cows, solemn creatures in the field, could become the butt of kitchen jokes. The father pauses, rubbing his hands, and explains to the child that these names are more than words. They keep order, they protect the family's claim. His tone softens, though, as he admits that sometimes he forgets which cow gave which pail of milk. "So I just say all the names," he confesses with a shrug. The family laughs again, and you chuckle softly at the image of a farmer covering all bases by chanting like an overzealous lawyer. Historians still argue whether such muttered lists were truly effective or whether they reveal a society so steeped in oral tradition that naming became inseparable from daily chores. But standing here, you sense both practicality and ritual woven together, turning ordinary work into memory keeping. The churn squeaks, the butter thickens, and the muttering continues. Buttercup, milk white, crooked horn. The names repeat until they blur, folding into the rhythm of the churn. The sigh of the fire, the child's soft humming. You close your eyes, lulled by the cadence, the taste of butter almost lingering on your tongue. The butter-scented warmth clings to you as you step outside, only to hear the lighter tones of children's voices echoing across the yard. You follow the sound and come upon a circle of kids, bundled in wool, hopping over patches of frost. They're playing a game, their small boots thudding against frozen turf. And as you listen, you realize they're chanting lists of cow names like a nursery rhyme. Mainstream fact: Icelandic children's games often drew directly from daily life, mimicking chores and traditions in play. Oral culture made repetition, and rhyme natural teaching tools. Quirky tidbit: some rhymes reserved in folklore mention specific cow names, woven into counting songs much like modern eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Historians still argue whether these games were widespread or just the memories of a few families captured by later collectors. The children skip in a circle, chanting, "Bright ear, red nose, crooked horn, who will lead the herd at morn." One child jumps into the center, arms outstretched like horns, bellowing until the others collapse in laughter. You grin, charmed by the sight. It's hide-and-seek meets barnyard drama. Another round begins, this time with sillier names. Priest pants, little snorer, stumbles fence. The children roar with laughter again, and you do too, unable to help yourself. The game shifts into mock trials. Two children argue playfully over who owns Snow Bear. They stomp their feet, shouting, "Mine!" "No, mine," until the judge, a boy with a stick for a staff, declares a fine of 3 snowballs. The others pelt the loser with icy handfuls, squealing with glee. You laugh out loud, realizing they're rehearsing the law itself through play, turning solemn fines into wintry fun. One girl, her cheeks red from cold, sings a verse she clearly invented on the spot. Milk White brings a butter churn. Starhide waits for spring's return. The others cheer, and she beams, proud of her impromptu poetry. You can't help thinking she might grow into a saga poet someday, planting seeds now in this frosty yard. The cows, grazing nearby, watch the scene with mild interest, their jaws moving in rhythm with the chants. You imagine them amused by the children's imitation quarrels, as if thinking, so that's what all the fuss is about. Historians still argue whether these games should be read as cultural transmission, deliberate training in law and memory, or simply as children's creativity echoing the adult world. Either way, the result is the same. The next generation carries names forward, not with solemnity, but with laughter. The game slows as the night deepens. Children collapse into heaps on the frosty ground, giggling and panting, their chants fading into yawns. Parents call them back indoors, voices sharp but loving. One child lingers, muttering cow names under her breath, as though unwilling to let the rhythm end. You smile softly, recognizing that the tradition is alive here, in the playful breath of children as much as in the stern rulings of lawmen. You lean against a fence post, watching your breath join theirs in white clouds. The chants still echo in your ears, softened into lullabies by the quiet of the night. Bright Ear, Red Nose, Crooked Horn, Little Snorer. The names blur together, turning from game into dream, from law into song. The mist drifts away as dawn edges across the horizon, pale and uncertain. You follow the farmers back to a cluster of turf houses, where the smell of roasting meat and with smoke announces a feast. Inside, benches or crowded mugs clink, and the air is thick with laughter and steam. At the center of it all stands a long wooden table piled with bread, cheese, and mugs of ale. Yet even here, amid food and celebration, the names of cows rise like toasts. Mainstream fact. Feasts were a cornerstone of Icelandic social life, reinforcing alliances and displaying wealth. Livestock, particularly cows, were central to these gatherings, not only as food but as symbols of prosperity. Quirky tidbit? Some sagas describe hosts proudly raising cups to cows by name, thanking them for the milk and butter that made the feast possible. Historians still argue whether these toasts were common practice, or merely literary embellishments meant to highlight the connection between wealth and cattle. You settle onto a bench, listening as a farmer lifts his mug and declares, "To Milk White, whose cream fill the churns this spring." The crowd cheers, mugs lifted high. Another chimes in, "To Bright Ear, fatten and fair, who feeds us tonight." Laughter ripples through the hall. You can't help but grin at the image. Cows as honored guests, toasted like heroes at a feast. The humor flows with the ale. A man stands dramatically and raises his cup. To Crooked Horn, who once broke into a grain store and ate like a bishop. The hall erupts in laughter, and even you chuckle, picturing a cow smugly munching stolen grain. Someone else adds, "And to Little Snorer, whose snorts kept the whole barn awake last winter." More laughter rolls like thunder, shaking the rafters. The cows themselves, tethered outside in the cold, chew calmly, oblivious to their fame. You imagine them honored in name while indifferent in body, the true definition of reluctant celebrities. That thought makes you smirk, amused at the irony. As the feast continues, music joins the toasts. A fiddler scrapes out a tune, and a singer improvises verses about famous cows of the valley. The names slip into rhyme. Snow Bear in the storm, Bright Ear at dawn, Milk White and churn, Crooked Horn gone. The crowd claps along, ale spilling, cheeks flushed. You sway with the rhythm, half lulled by the absurd poetry, half carried by the warmth. Historians still argue whether these feasting toasts genuinely shaped cultural memory of livestock, or whether sagas simply exaggerated them for effect. But in this hall, it feels utterly real. Names stitched into celebration, cows woven into identity not just through law but through laughter and song. The fire crackles, sparks dancing into the smoky rafters. You feel your eyes grow heavy, the voice is softening around you. To Bright Ear, to Milk White, to Crooked Horn. The toasts echo, drifting into the rhythm of clinking mugs. You lean back, drowsy, realizing that here even a feast becomes another chapter in the endless lullaby of names. The echoes of laughter and clinking mugs fade as you leave the warmth of the hall. Outside, the air bites sharper, the sky streaked with shifting bands of green, aurora rippling like silent curtains across the heavens. You follow a trail up a rocky rise where a circle of elders sits around a low fire. They are not feasting or joking. Instead, they murmur about omens, their voices hushed as if the night itself is listening. Mainstream fact: medieval Icelanders often linked unusual natural events with livestock fortunes. Auroras, volcanic ash, or strange weather believed to signal abundance or disaster in herds. Quirky tidbit: some records hint that cows with certain names, like Snowbear or Starhide, were considered lucky charms against famine, as though the name itself carried protective power. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuinely widespread or confined to isolated folk traditions. You crouch near the fire, letting its warmth reach your frozen hands. One elder points at the sky and whispers, "Snowbear was born under this light. She'll guard us from hunger." Another counters, "No, it is Starhide who carries the blessing. Snowbear merely endures." The debate rolls softly, not angry but reverent, as if names themselves are divining rods pointing to survival. You can't help but smile faintly at the thought. Farmers acting like fortune tellers, reading cows as if they were consolations. The humor grows when one man insists, "Crooked Horn is surely cursed. Every churn of butter she gives tastes sour." The others chuckle, shaking their heads, though you sense the edge of superstition underneath. The aurora flickers brighter, washing the snow in eerie green light. The cows in the valley below lift their heads briefly, as though curious. The elders murmur again, weaving memory with myth. One recalls a winter when a cow named Bright Ear seemed to lead the herd through blizzards, her name later praised as a sign of guidance. Another swears that Milk White calved on a night just like this, ensuring prosperity for her owners. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect genuine belief in name magic, or whether they were retrospective, attaching significance to events after fact. You sense the blurred line between folklore and faith, names serving as anchors in a land where survival often hinged on forces beyond human control. The fire pops, sparks spiraling upward to join the aurora. You feel yourself lulled by the rhythm of voices, by the gentle repetition of names carried like prayers. Snowbear, Starhide, Bright Ear, Milk White. Each syllable seems to merge with the crackle of fire and the shimmer of light above. One elder, his beard frosted white, murmurs, "As long as their names are spoken, the herd endures." You close your eyes, the words rolling into you like a tide, soothing, steady, almost hypnotic. The cows below graze quietly. The aurora ripples overhead, and you drift deeper into the gentle strangeness of a world where even the sky seems to honor the names of cattle. The aurora fades into a pale glow of dawn, and you follow the slope back down into a valley where frost crunches underfoot. A cluster of farmers is gathered around a pair of tethered cows, their voices raised not in anger but in performance. You realize you've stumbled onto a mock trial, staged half seriously, half for entertainment. The participants wear cloaks pulled tight, but their tones are exaggerated, their gestures almost theatrical. Mainstream fact: the Icelandic, Iceland's great outdoor parliament, often blended law with spectacle. Trials are performed before crowds, and even mundane disputes drew audiences who treated them as public theater. Quirky tidbit: some sagas describe cow trials that became running jokes in communities, retold with dramatic flair long after the real disputes were settled. Historians still argue whether these performances were common practice or rare curiosities inflated by storytellers. One man strides forward, staff in hand, and declares, "This cow, Bright Ear, belongs to me, for I named her while snow still lay on mountains." His opponent interrupts with mock indignation. "Lies. Bright Ear was mine first, and she answered when I called her across the field." The crowd chuckles, clapping their mittens against the cold, enjoying the show as much as the verdict. The judge, a grinning elder, bangs a stick against a stone. We shall hear witnesses. Two boys leap up, clearly rehearsed, claiming to have seen Bright Ear graze under one man's watch. Another interrupts, insisting she grazed elsewhere. The performance spirals into laughter, neighbors calling out, women rolling their eyes, children squealing with delight. You can't help but laugh, too. It's law as community theater. Bureaucracy turned into comedy. Then comes the punchline. The judge solemnly finds a loser. 3 mugs of ale to be paid immediately. The hall bursts into cheers as mugs are passed around. Even the loser bows theatrically, grinning as he sips. You realize that in this society, law didn't just regulate. It entertained, bonded, and reminded everyone that rules could be funny as well as serious. The cows, Bright Ear and her companion, chew stolidly through the spectacle, indifferent to the verdict. Their eyes reflect the cold light, their breath steaming, as if they've seen it all before. You imagine them thinking, name us as you like, the grass tastes the same. Historians still argue whether these stage trials soften community tensions, turning disputes into shared amusement, or whether they trivialize the very laws meant to hold society together. Watching here, you suspect both are true. The laughter eases grudges, yet the memory of law remains, etched in humor as much as in record. As the mock trial dissolves into singing and more ale, you drift back in the crowd. The laughter follows you across the frosted field, light and strangely soothing. Even justice, you realize, can be a lullaby when it is repeated often enough, softened with jokes, and carried on the breath of neighbors who know one another too well. The laughter from the mock trial fades as you wander along a riverbank, its surface glazed within ice that cracks under the weight of hooves. A group of farmers stand on either side of the stream, shouting back and forth, their voices bouncing in the cold air. At first you think it's another dispute, but as you draw closer you realize they're cataloging cows across the water, calling out names to confirm ownership without risking a dangerous crossing. Mainstream fact: Iceland's rugged terrain often made direct travel difficult. Streams, lava fields, and glaciers forced communities to develop oral methods for managing claims at a distance. Quirky tidbit: some sagas hint at farmers shouting animal names across valleys as a way to reaffirm ownership, essentially turning landscape into courtroom. Historians still argue whether these long-distance declarations were legally binding or merely informal agreements kept alive by memory. You watch as one farmer cups his hands and bellows, "Milk White grazes here, by the stone with the raven mark." Across the water, his neighbor answers, "Then Crooked Horn is mine, tethered by the birch stump." The names echo off the cliffs, repeated again for clarity, until the whole valley hums with syllables. It feels oddly like a chant, a chorus carried by frost and rock. The cows themselves low in confusion, ears twitching at the echoes. One flicks her tail as though annoyed. Another simply continues chewing grass, unimpressed by her starring role in a valley-wide recital. You chuckle softly. Imagine being a cow, your name shouted like a war cry across rivers while you just want a nap. One farmer slips in a joke, calling, "And Little Snorer belongs to you, unless she's snoring on my side again." The crowd on both banks laughs, the tension easing. You grin too, realizing that even in these long-distance rituals, humor softened the edges of law. The air grows colder, breath rising in clouds, but the voices carry steadily, names woven into the landscape like threads in a tapestry. It strikes you how the land itself becomes a witness. Rocks, trees, rivers holding memory as firmly as people do. Perhaps this is why disputes are so fierce. When names echo across valleys, they become part of the terrain, and to lose one is to lose ground itself. Historians still argue whether these shouted claims were ever brought as testimony to the Ilingi, or if they were simply practical agreements between neighbors. Standing here, though you sense both, the solemnity of law carried on wind, the humor of farmers sneaking jokes between declarations, and a practical need to manage herds without freezing in icy water. The echoes fade as the farmers lower their voices. Satisfied, they wave across the river, promises reinforced by sound alone. The cows shuffle back toward barns. The ice groans under retreating hooves, and silence settles again. You stand still, listening to the memory of names hanging in the valley like faint bells, fading slowly, gently into the cold. The echoes along the river fade as you wander back toward the shelter of low, turf-roofed houses. Smoke curls into the pale sky, and you notice an older farmer sitting on a stool just outside his barn. His cloak is patched, his beard stiff with frost, yet his eyes gleam with stubborn pride. A younger man approaches, his son, perhaps, and they fall into a quiet argument. You lean closer, realizing this is not about trade or pasture, but about names. Mainstream fact. By the later medieval period, legal reforms attempted to simplify Iceland's complex naming traditions, streamlining ownership claims. Some lawmakers argued that not every cow needed an individual name, especially when herds grew large. Quirky tidbit? Despite reform, elders often resisted, insisting that each animal deserved its own identity, carrying history and family honor. Historians still argue whether this resistance was practical conservatism or sentimental attachment. The younger man says, "Father, the lawmen now allow us to mark cattle instead of naming them all. It is quicker." The old farmer scoffs, spitting into the snow. Marks fade. Words live. I will not let Milkwhite or Starhide vanish into scratches. His voice is steady, but his hands tremble slightly as he grips his staff. You smile faintly at the scene. It's the timeless clash. The young wanting efficiency, the old guarding tradition. The cows, standing nearby, chewing differently, their ears twitching as though they've heard the argument 100 times already. One flicks her tail, swatting snowflakes in the air as if to mock both sides. The sun presses on. If we simplify, disputes will end sooner. We'll waste less time in court. The father chuckles bitterly. And what then? Cows become numbers? Shall I call her Cow 1, Cow 2? Bah, she is Bright Ear. She is part of me. There's humor, too. The old man grumbles. Next they'll have us name cows after bishops to make them happy. The son laughs despite himself, shaking his head, and you chuckle along, amused at how easily rebellion sneaks into everyday talk. Historians still argue whether such resistance truly slowed reform, or whether law eventually outpaced memory. Yet standing here, you feel the tension between past and present as if it were carved into the air. Names are more than law. They are identity, stubborn as frost clinging to stone. The argument softens at last. The son sighs and sits beside his father. Together, they watch the herd shuffle against the barn. After a long silence, the father murmurs one by one the names of the cows. Bright Ear, Milkwhite, Crooked Horn, Snow Bear. His voice is low, steady like a prayer. The son listens quietly, perhaps realizing that efficiency may save time, but memory saves meaning. The sky darkens, snow begins to fall in lazy flakes. You pull your cloak tighter, hearing the old man's voice thread through the hush. Names fall with the snow, soft and steady, stubborn against the silence. The cows flick their ears, tails swishing, and you sense a quiet resistance, the refusal to let names fade, no matter what reforms the law demands. Snow swirls heavier as twilight settles in, cloaking the valley in a muffled hush. You find yourself drawn toward the largest turf hall you've seen yet, its roof sagging under drifts, smoke streaming steadily from a wide chimney. Inside, warmth and candlelight spill across benches where villagers gather shoulder to shoulder. At the center stands a poet, cloaked in dark wool, his voice carrying above the crackle of the fire. You realize you've entered not a court or feast this time, but a recital, a saga evening where cows, of all things, become characters in verse. Mainstream fact, skalds or poets, played a crucial role in Icelandic society, reciting sagas that preserved history and entertained communities during long winters. Though most sagas focus on heroes and blood feuds, animals, especially prized livestock, slip into verses as symbols of wealth and continuity. Quirky tidbit: some fragments preserve poems that personify cows with heroic traits, likening them to warriors or travelers. Historians still argue whether such verses were meant seriously or tongue-in-cheek performances. The poet raises his hand and silence falls. His voice rolls like surf. Bright Ear stood firm in the storm. Snow Bear braved the mountain's roar. Milkwhite carried warmth to the hearth. Crooked Horn guarded the gate. The crowd hums with approval, nodding as if hearing familiar friends praise in lofty style. You grin. These cows are being elevated into a pantheon, their names stitched into the same fabric as chieftains and kings. Then the humor breaks through. The poet smirks and adds, and Little Snorer, loud as thunder, kept the valley awake till dawn. The hall bursts into laughter, mugs clattering on tables. You laugh too, the absurdity softened by warmth and ale. Even sagas, it seems, could bend toward comedy. The rhythm lulls you. Verse follows verse, some solemn, some silly. Each name is rolled slowly, like prayer beads. Bright Ear, Snow Bear, Milk White, Crooked Horn. You notice children mouthing the words along with the poet. Proof that memory is being handed down even as the candles burn low. A man near you whispers that this tradition matters because names in verse last longer than names in court. A judgment may fade, but a rhyme lingers for generations. You nod, recognizing the truth. Oral law and oral art blur here. Law reinforced by song. Identity carried on melody. Historians still argue whether cows entered sagas to mark real events or to offer comic relief. Standing here, you feel both. Poetry dignifies them, while jokes remind listeners not to take even law too seriously. The poet slows, his voice dropping like embers in ash. Names hold through winter's dark. Names carry from hearth to field. Names bind us to beast, and beast to our bread. The hall grows quiet, almost reverent. You lean against the timber post, eyelids heavy, soothed by the cadence. In this moment, the cows are more than livestock. They are verses, laws, lullabies, each syllable a gentle step into drowsiness. The saga night lingers in your ears as you step once more into the cold, the stars sharp above you, the wind carrying faint trails of song. You follow a narrow track toward a cluster of barns where torchlight flickers. Inside, farmers and their families sit in a circle, but instead of telling stories or singing rhymes, they are counting, slowly, deliberately, almost like a ritual. Each name of each cow is spoken aloud, one by one, while others nod confirm. Mainstream fact. In a world without widespread written ledgers, oral recitation acted as both record and rehearsal of law. At seasonal gatherings, households would recite inventories of livestock aloud to ensure agreement. Quirky tidbit? Some sources suggest these recitations sometimes went on for hours, cow by cow, calf by calf, until every name was confirmed, like a roll call at school, but with mooing in the background. Historians still argue whether these oral inventories were strictly legal requirements or simply cautious traditions to prevent disputes. The circle is solemn, though the work is tedious. One man begins. Milk White calved last spring. Bright Ear, strong on the north pasture. Crooked Horn, still tethered by the birch. A woman nods, repeating each name anchored in memory. A child whispers the syllables, her eyes heavy but determined not to forget. You listen, lulled by the cadence. It feels like liturgy, each name falling into place like beads on a rosary. Buttercup, Snow Bear, Starhide, Little Snorer. The repetition is so steady you almost forget it is about animals at all. It becomes a chant, a hum, a lullaby. There's humor, too, slipping into the monotony. When one farmer solemnly names Stumble's fence, the group chuckles softly, and the tension breaks for a heartbeat. Another mutters, "Don't forget Priest's pants," and laughter ripples again. You grin. Proof that even bureaucracy invites jokes, especially when the work feels endless. The torches hiss, casting shadows high across the rafters. You notice tally sticks lean against the wall, carved with notches that correspond to the name spoken. It's double record keeping. One oral, one physical, each reinforcing the other. You think of it as a medieval two-factor authentication. Say the name, show the notch, and the truth is confirmed. Historians still argue whether these communal recitations serve more as memory aids or as binding law, but here the line hardly matters. The act itself carries weight. Names spoken aloud in company, sealed not by ink but by echo. The circle continues, name after name, until the rhythm becomes hypnotic. Crooked Horn, Buttercup, Snow Bear, Bright Ear. You lean against a timber post, eyelids heavy, the sound washing over you. Each name feels less like an identifier and more like a spell, steady and soothing. The cows in their stalls shift lazily, some flicking their ears at the sound of their names, others snorting softly. They, too, become part of the chant, their breaths rising and fall with the rhythm. You close your eyes, letting the murmurs blend with the sigh of the animals, until it feels like the whole barn is breathing names into the night. The barn grows quiet, the last name spoken like sighs fading into the rafters. You step outside into the cold once more, where the sky is soft with falling snow. The flakes drift slowly, lazily, muffling every sound until even your own footsteps feel hushed. Ahead, the pasture lies in silence. Cows huddle together, their breath rising in gentle plumes. For the first time, no one calls their names. The animals simply exist, calm, still, anonymous under the blanket of night. Mainstream fact. Despite centuries of laws and customs, not every cow's name endured. Many slipped into obscurity, forgotten as families changed or herds thinned. Yet the idea of naming, the belief that identity mattered, remained woven into Icelandic culture. Quirky tidbit: a handful of forgotten names resurface only in odd corners of manuscripts, where scribes accidentally left them dangling in margins. Historians still argue whether those lost names once held weight, or were merely fragments of stories that no longer had meaning. You walk among the sleeping herd. Snow lands softly on their backs, melting into steam. One cow lifts her head briefly, blinks at you, then lowers it again with a sigh. In that moment, you realize something almost tender. Names matter deeply to humans, but to cows, it is the grass, the warmth, the quiet that carry meaning. You smile faintly, warmed by the irony. The wind slows. The night deepens. The long journey through laws, sagas, quarrels, jokes, and chances led here, to stillness, where names fade into whispers, and only the rhythm of breathing remains. Now, let yourself drift with that quiet. Imagine the snow falling slower and slower, each flake a pale feather settling on the world. The cows stand motionless, their sides rising and falling like the calmest tide. The disputes are gone, the feasts are gone, even the laughter has softened into memory. What remains is peace, stretched wide across the valley. You breathe with the herd, slowly, steadily. Each inhale is cool, each exhale warm, misting gently into the night. The names that once mattered so fiercely now dissolve into the air, softer than the snow itself. Bright ear, milk white, crooked horn, snow bear, each syllable fades, like a candle flickering before it goes out. The ground is muffled, the stars are distant, the world is quiet. Even the laws, so sharp and detailed, lose their edges here. All that remains is rhythm. The snows fall, the cow's breath, your own steady heart. You feel the weight of history settle into calm, like a heavy cloak wrapped gently around your shoulders. The quarrels of men, the wit of poets, the chants of herders, all of it softens, leaving only stillness. You are no longer in a world of noise and judgment. You are in a meadow of silence, a cradle of snow. Let your thoughts wander now, slower and slower, until they no longer press with urgency. Let the breath steady. Let the eyelids grow heavy. Let the snow blanket you too. The herd drifts into sleep. The land drifts into sleep. And so do you. Good night.